Steve Schmidt here with The Warning, and I am thrilled today to be joined by Ryan Lizza at Telios, and also the renowned American patriot and jurist, Judge Michael Luttig, who has written exclusively with Ryan today a piece that we're going to talk about that is important to talk about. And it's about something that's difficult for me to talk about in a public space, which is faith and belief and self-evident truths steeped in faith and belief. So because Judge Luttig is one of the preeminent jurists of this generation, and history will record in this moment of American crisis his titanic integrity and contributions to the sustainment of the rule of law, I think we should start this conversation by invoking some of the words of another giant of American history, another jurist, Judge Learned Hand, who gave a speech in 1944 called The Spirit of Liberty. And I'm going to read an excerpt of that speech as we get started in the conversation. And Judge Hand said in 1944, "What then is the spirit of liberty? I cannot define it. Can only tell you my own faith. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which seeks to understand the mind of other men and women. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which weighs their interests alongside its own without bias. The spirit of liberty remembers that not even a sparrow falls to earth unheeded. The spirit of liberty is the spirit of him who near 2,000 years ago taught mankind that lesson it has never learned, but never quite forgotten, that there may be a kingdom where the least shall be heard and considered side by side with the greatest. And now in that spirit of an America which has never been, and which may never be, nay, which never will be, except all the conscience and courage of Americans create it, yet in the spirit of that America, which lies hidden in some form in the aspirations of us all, in the spirit of that America for which our young men are at this moment fighting and dying, in that spirit of liberty and of America, I ask you to rise and with me pledge our faith in the glorious destiny of our beloved country." And so Judge Luttig is very much a descendant of Judge Hand, who is smiling down at him today as he writes this important piece. And Ryan, as I'll start this conversation with you today, is how did you get Judge Luttig to exclusively write this on your platform? And I think that today, some of the most important words written anywhere in America have appeared, not on the pages of the New York Times, but on the screen of the recipients of your independent media venture.
Oh, that is very, very nice. That's very, very nice of you to say, Steve. And I think we're going to just embarrass Judge Luttig a little bit more with praise here, because as a lot of people who are watching this know, he's one of the greatest living Americans. I've had the pleasure of knowing Judge Luttig for about a little over 5 years now. And I'll never forget, I asked to interview him once, sat him down on a setup just like this. And he didn't realize that I was going to interview him for over 3 hours. It was he seemed like a tortured prisoner by the end of it, and literally went through his entire biography, entire life. And I heard of Judge Luttig many times as one of the preeminent judges. I remember very well covering the Bush administration, and Steve, I know you have a little experience with this, when he was considered for this Supreme Court. And when I did that interview, he later told me he hadn't done anything like that in his entire career. Anyway, one of the great, amazing stories he told me then was the story of his role on January 6th, 2021. That story had not been told. And Judge Luttig was asked by the vice president's office, as many people know, to make public his advice to Vice President Pence that Pence had absolutely no constitutional or authority or any other authority to overturn the results of the election, as Donald Trump was pressuring him to do. And Judge Luttig, I'm telling this story for you while you sit here. I hope that's okay. Judge Luttig decided to tweet out that information and that advice, probably some of the most famous and historic tweets that have ever been written on that website. But I love my favorite detail of that story is that Judge Luttig didn't know how to tweet. He didn't know how to use Twitter. So first he had to call his son, who walked him through it. And then he wrote the legal opinion that Pence had no right to do that, no authority. Pence, in a letter to America on his way that he released on the way to the Capitol that day, then cited Judge Luttig's analysis. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Judge Luttig helped prevent a coup in America on that day. A lot of other people know Judge Luttig from his acclaimed testimony during the January 6th committee's during his January 6th committee appearance. Anyway, it's been my great pleasure to interview him over the years, to ask him for legal advice occasionally, and to be his friend. And when he told me about this piece recently and how he had been studying the Declaration of Independence and what he had written, I didn't ask any questions. And I said, Judge, your future is on Substack in some way. I think you should use it as an outlet to write. And if you want me to publish this at Tellus News, I would be more than happy to. We never talked about any payment, but I should, in case the judge was wondering, that we should have negotiated that beforehand, Judge, because this was this was free. He did this for nothing, Steve, and it was my absolute pleasure to put this into the world, and I'll be spending my week getting this in front of as many eyeballs as possible.
Tremendous. Well, Judge Luttig, with no further ado, as we built a little bit of an audience for us here, you have written in your piece today, on this July 4th, 2025, the eve of the 250th anniversary of America's Declaration of Independence and the founding of this nation, we, the people, hold to be self-evident these 27 truths about freedom and about tyranny. And it begins we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain and unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You write, government should secure, protect, and preserve our unalienable rights, liberties, and freedoms. And you go on from there. But welcome, Judge Luttig. It's an honor. What compelled you to get inside the Declaration of Independence and reassert for us, as we begin this 250th year anniversary celebration of it, the core tenets which any observer would not be criticized, I think, for observing that we seem to have lost touch with some of the things that you're writing about today, or at least some of us have?
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you so much, Ryan. Um, I I really consider myself uh, little more, if anything, than a conduit um, for the founders of our country and the framers of our Constitution to today. Today being pretty significant. We're on the eve of the 250th anniversary, if you will, of the United States of America. I am honored beyond words simply to be a conduit, if you will, and a small conduit at that, for the original Americans and the Americans down through the ages. In this sense, I am merely repeating their great thoughts. The only thing that I've done here is repeat them today, which is when they need to be repeated and learned anew by the American people. But thank you. Thank you both.
Let's read some of them because they matter. I'm going to keep going in the piece. And Judge Luttig, I just want to ask you as I go through these paragraphs for you to say something about why that is important, why that is a self-evident truth. I did see a question about the perversely named Big Beautiful Bill. I will say this about it. It's the most corrupt piece of legislation in American history over 250 years. There's no comparison for it. It's hard to understand what a trillion is, everybody, but I'll give you this point of orientation. If I were to say to Judge Luttig and Ryan, I look forward to talking to you guys in a million seconds, we would be back together in 12 days. But if it didn't go well, and I said, I'll see you in a billion seconds, it would be 33 years. A trillion seconds, my friends, is 33,000 years. And that is the difference between a billion and a trillion. And this atrocious bill immorally adds 4 trillion of debt to generations of Americans not born as we crest above $40 trillion of national debt in an act of national immorality brought to us by the Trump 119th Congress. But let me continue on to the ephemeral, which is what Judge Luttig is writing today, which is this. For the king has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection. Government is instituted and its powers derived from the consent of we, the governed, in order that government will secure, protect, and preserve our rights, liberties, and freedoms. For to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Government power is limited, and government is obligated to conform its every act to the requirements of law, which acknowledges our creation as equals and enshrines our equal and unalienable rights, liberties, and freedoms. Why, Judge, has there been a departure from this faith?
Well, first, Steve, those are the most magnificent words ever written or spoken. And when I say that, I mean in the world. And all of your listeners and viewers understand that. There is no one today who could even attempt to approximate the soaring language of the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution of the United States, for that matter. But to your question, we Americans have forgotten the Declaration of Independence. And we need to be reminded of it. We desperately need to be reminded of it today, because this is the first time in the almost 250 years of America's existence that these ideals and this structure of government for the people are being tested. And the most that I ever hoped for in the piece that I've written is to remind the American people from whence we have come, and in so doing, to remind them of how far we have strayed from where we came from. But I would only have attempted to do that by using the words of the American colonists in the Declaration of Independence and our forefathers in the Constitution of the United States. I, like many Americans, are deeply worried about how far we have strayed from the original intent for the United States of America. That's not to say that we can't get back to that, but it is to say we're very, very far from what the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States provided to us for this country.
The next paragraph begins, and this is an astonishing one. For the king gave, quote, his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government, end quote. Every person's rights, liberties, and freedoms, as well as the rights of the majority and minority, are best secured and safeguarded by separation of the respective powers of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. By separation of the powers of each of the branches of government from the powers of the others, the powers of each of the three co-equal branches of government are limited and checked and balanced by the powers of the other. For the king has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has erected a multitude of new offices.
I'll pick it up for you, Steve, if you want. He's erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. And he has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers.
And this is what gives birth to the nation. This is what compels these men from the 13 colonies to pledge to one another their lives and their fortunes and to commit treason against the king. And they illuminate for not just their fellow citizens about to be citizens, they illuminate it for all of history. And so when you think about the mass agents, Judge, running riot in California without badges, stuffing people into unmarked vans, how do you conceptualize that in your own head against your career on the federal bench about what's happened? If someone had said to you at the turn of the millennia that that would happen in the United States by the end of the 25th year, what would you have thought?
Steve, I think I will choose to answer it this way, if I may. That would never have been in the contemplation of those Americans who signed the Declaration of Independence, or, for that matter, those Americans who signed the Constitution of the United States of America. And the particulars of that explanation, can be found in the in this document that I've drafted today in various and sundry of the provisions. But I will offer that this document, assuming that it is true to the Declaration of Independence and to the Constitution of the United States, suggests how far we've strayed from those original founding documents of our nation.
For the king has transported us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses and quartered large bodies of armed troops among us and protected them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. You write, all persons should have the right to counsel who is independent of the government and uninfluenced and uninfluenceable by the government, and whose highest responsibility in the representation of their client is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution against abuses by the government. For the king tried us for pretended offenses and protected murderers by a mock trial from punishment. On this Independence Day, July 4th, 2025, these self-evident truths of freedom and of tyranny are solemnly declared and published, is how this piece ends. And as you look out across the country, it's purposeful, I imagine, on your part to make the comparisons that are implicit in this piece with the events of today. Because when you plainly read the Declaration of Independence in 2025, one cannot help but notice the officiousness and the high hand of government operating in a previously unimaginable manner that aptly draws comparison to the officiousness denounced in this document of King George III. Or am I misreading that?
You are not misreading it at all. And that is the power of the piece today. but the ultimate power of the piece is that it's written in entirely neutral terms, but in those neutral terms speaks directly to America today. That, I would say, is the beauty and the resilience of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, Steve.
And one thing to throw out, Steve, just for people who are joining us and didn't listen to the previous conversation that Judge and I had, I wrote this in the introduction to the piece. And this is not a piece that will reward skimming or scanning. So for viewers, listeners, find a quiet spot, set off your phone, or if the only copy you have is on your phone, given that it's Substack, that may be the case. Set your phone to some kind of distraction-free setting and read the piece slowly and carefully. It was only when I did that the true power of the piece hit me, washed over me, and it because Judge Luttig was so careful not to introduce contemporary events into this piece. Donald Trump is never mentioned. It packs a punch when you read it carefully and you realize how the 1770s, in some very important ways, are not that different than the times we live in. And that was really kind of shocking for me, actually, to think, because all of us read about that time and read about the Declaration as a ancient history, some that's unconnected from our own lives and what's going on in modern times. And this was the first time I had ever thought of some very, very obvious and scary connections between those two times. But the piece requires reading it carefully and slowly to appreciate that. I hope I haven't said anything that you disagree with, Judge, but that's my own reaction.
Ryan, thank you. And one thing that has struck me, and I'm new to this myself, and I would want the American people to come to this new, but I've learned since writing this that many of my friends and many of their friends in turn, and therefore many Americans actually read the Declaration of Independence on July 4th. I confess I've never crossed my mind, but I will say that it will never cross my mind. It will not fail to cross my mind every single year the rest of my life. And that's one of the reasons that I'm grateful that I have written this piece. That is for my own future edification as a proud citizen of the United States of America.
It is extraordinary to think about, by candlelight in Philadelphia, Thomas Jefferson sharing a draft of this with John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, who are reading it for the first time, reading words like this. For in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned the king for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Dramatic words in the summer of 1776. And as Judge Luttig continues, right? And for all of you on, every person should have the right to dissent from government and to protest government peacefully. For where tyranny and despotism demand allegiance to tyrant and to uniformity, democracy and freedom from tyranny demand the opposite, allegiance to country and to differences of people and opinion. Quote, when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce a people under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. You continue, every person should have the right to speak freely and to associate freely with others without fear that government will punish them for the exercise of their right to speak and associate freely. And so this is fundamental. The right to believe as you believe, to think as you think, to love as you love, to be free and to pursue happiness. And it was against a tyranny that these assertions are made that say, no, we reject this dogma, this philosophy, this faith of control, this religion of power. And some of us in the country have found a new faith built around a man and his faction, but not around these words and not around the foundation that they laid for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that would follow. So you can find this, Judge Luttig's piece on Telos, Ryan Lizza's Substack. I urge you to print it, to forward it, to share it. And the great power of these mediums is that starting from this afternoon, many, many millions of people will read this, see this, and have a chance to discuss it and reflect on it with their family, with their friends, because what we cheer is liberty on July 4th. When the smoke cleared above the lines at Yorktown, the Marquis de Lafayette saw the British flags had been taken down and replaced with white flags. And he knew the war was won. And he said, humanity has its victory, liberty has its country. And that's what we're talking about here today. Judge, when you look at the loss of faith in the American people regarding the rule of law, regarding the Supreme Court, the collapse of trust between citizen and institution, what wisdom do you have about how to regain that? How does that come back?
Steve, the only way possible is for the nation as a whole to re-examine itself and its founding and recommit itself to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America. I'm not naive. Will that ever happen in the way I just described? Of course not. But the beginning would be for a sufficient number of Americans to do so and to recommit themselves to the ideas and the principles, first in the Declaration of Independence, and then second in the Constitution of the United States. That's what we need in America today. If there is to be any hope of returning from to whence we came, which is to say that the founders of this great nation, the authors of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, they knew what they were doing. And today, almost 250 years later, it would be fair to say that, we, the people, have lost sight of the genius of our forefathers and foremothers, as captured in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. But that's a tragedy. And my hope is that we can return to our founding and our founding principles someday, soon, and continue our path through all history in the way that we began that path, but have strayed from at this point in our history.
Do you think the founders would have been more surprised that the Republic made it to the edge of 250 years, or that it took 250 years for the demigod they worried about to well and truly and fully arise?
The obviously, you know our history better than I do, and
I don't know that.
Exactly what the founders and the framers of our Constitution feared most. I think that, just think, Steve, about the wisdom of that fear and what it understood about America for the next 1,000 years, which is to say they had this fear 250 years ago. It's hard for any of us to say how soon our founders and the framers of our Constitution would have anticipated today. But I, for one, believe, though they anticipated it, they did not anticipate it this soon in American history. And but they spoke eloquently about this moment in American history. And they warned Americans about this moment in history. And they prayed that this moment would never come.
And the moment has come, and these documents that we share such a reverence for, and I know so many people joining us today do, Um, we live at a time of such division and partisanship and a lack of grace and an inability to see virtue in the way that Washington predicted when he warned about the danger of factions that became political parties, where you can look at an entire presidency of someone of the other party and see no good in it, no good in them, no good idea. And I say that because I think about Ronald Reagan, and I think about Reagan's warning that democracy was only ever one generation from slipping away. And when you think about the fact that there's only ever been 700 million Americans, right? There's 340 million now. So there's just slightly less than half of all Americans who have ever been or alive in this moment. And they don't necessarily have a connection to 200-year-old documents, that 250-year-old documents that we don't talk about, that we don't covet, that are exiled and excised from our public conversations and our secular faith, and to our great detriment. And I think, realizing that there has to be a renewal, has to be a restoration of this faith in our liberty, our freedom, our values, our ideas is fundamental to being able to make it through this period of history. And as you both know, there have been other very trying periods of American history, right? And one of those periods is written about in a contemplative and worrying way in an article with the Statue of Liberty on it from June 5th of 1939, and it says America's future on it. And this was a period where the St. Louis was turned from American borders, and most of the Jews on it were killed in Nazi concentration camps, a deep and ugly and abiding scar on the soul of America. We have gone through these periods. We have gone through the storm. We have gone through these crises, and I think we're going into one again. And so the bedrock principles, or the rock, right, that we have to lash ourselves to during this period of contestation and testing. Judge, when you are pulled to a founding document in the country that you look for the rock, for you, what are those speeches? How do you rank them? Is it a Gettysburg Address? Is it a second inaugural by Lincoln? Is it the Declaration of Independence? Is it Thomas Paine's writings in 1775 and 1776? Is it Frederick Douglass lamenting what does the 4th of July mean to a slave? When you contemplate this and your heart is heavy with what's happening in the country, where do you look in addition to the Declaration of Independence? What is your kind of hierarchy of that American canon that's important for people on this program today to go and read and to explore a little bit?
Well, thank you for that question, Steve. With the greatest of respect to contemporary leaders of the United States of America, I do not go to any one of those men or women ever. I go to, first, the Declaration of Independence, second to the Constitution of the United States, and then to the people that you have listed. Excuse me. That you have listed. The people who or of the time of the founding of our nation, because I believe that we Americans have lost sight from whence we came, and worse still, we're not interested in where we came from. If we just stopped for a moment and thought about how lost we are today, I think it would be intuitive for Americans to go back to the founding and examine and re-examine the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. You know, back to the Federalist Papers, and try to recapture the spirit of those our forefathers and foremothers, and recapture the spirit that they wrote down in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. I mean, first off, it's riveting, and it's especially riveting today for the first time in American history, when everything that this nation stands for is being challenged. This, none of us want to think that this is that America is in its final days, but there's every reason today to fear that we're in the final days of the America that was established for us in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. I mean, there has to be a clarion call from someone or some ones to go forth and stop the dissension of this country before it's too late.
When you said you revert to the Constitution, to the Declaration of Independence, and look past all of the contemporary political leaders, which I, as a general proposition, agree with in terms of a search for understanding about who we are as a people. But I don't think John Kennedy counts as a contemporary, at least to me, in that his presidency existed outside of my lifespan. But John Kennedy, I think, uniquely is a voice that has a lot of relevance to this moment, because he was a bridge in a moment of anxiety, but also great optimism, to a younger generation who was able to communicate about virtues that would have been very understandable to the founders. He talked often about Rome and Greece and Athens and the principles of democracy in a way that did not seek to communicate them through the repetition of a word, as if the word itself is going to have the ability to elicit an emotion or an attachment or a feeling. And so I couldn't agree with you more that we badly need to see leaders rise and step forward. There are some of them out there, and I do think one of the faiths we have as an American is this reality that almost out of nowhere, almost providentially, the right leaders have emerged at the right moments, and sometimes just in the nick of time, in hours of great worry and great despair. And that's where we stand now. Before the Civil War, there was a Times of London editorial that talked about how it is that the war had come. And within that editorial, they talked about the extremism that over the 19th century, slavery had gone from an institution that was execrated even by its practitioners to one that had been defended now by an extremism for its preservation economically. And the writer talks about the South becoming enamored of its shame. And I think about those words with regard to the masked federal agents, with regard to the abuses of power, the assertions of power, the fetishization of cruelty, the presidential tour of the alligator Alcatraz, which is an obscenity, and the selling of T-shirts around it, and all of this vulgarity. They've become enamored of their shame, and that shame is antithetical to the values, the ideas, the ideals that we call patriotism, which is oppositional to nationalism. And patriotism is the faith that is born out of that incredibly compelling story that Judge Luttig is referencing when he talks about how arresting it is just to read the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and to put yourself in those moments of time, that when this was being written, and to appreciate the genius. And I would just say to everybody, do yourself a favor over the next couple of days. If you can binge watch John Adams on HBO, I always recommend it, but find the scene in that John Adams series where they signed the Declaration of Independence. And that's the closest any of us will ever get to be in that room, from that HBO miniseries, from the contemporaneous accounts of what it would have been like. And they did not whoop and cheer. It was a quiet moment. Couldn't have heard a pin drop. These men had no reason to believe this would be successful. And they all had every expectation to believe they'd be swinging from a rope. And there are 1,000 stories about the improbability of this country's endurance. And one of the things that all of us never expected to see is to be in a period of doubt and faith about the survival of the country. Yet here we are, because we had a lack of humility, I think, that we all share about the fragility of freedom and the lessons of freedom and its fragility have been handed down to us. But like children cannot hear their parents sometimes, we did not hear the warnings, but we hear them now. And we have a better chance, I think, to understand what we're about because of what Judge Luttig wrote today. And I thank you very much, Judge, for spending some time with 2,000 of us this afternoon, with Ryan, of course, for publishing this at Telos. You can find this piece at Telos. I am pronouncing that right, Ryan? I'm a public school kid from New Jersey. Right?
I'm a public school kid from Long Island, so you know.
I don't know. It's a very privileged knowledge.
It's Telos. It's Telos. Like tell us the news. You know, imagine it's TELLUS. Telos.
And Judge Luttig's piece there, and then and then
But make
Judge
sure
Luttig.
Make sure you subscribe to Luttig's Substack, because that's the only way we're going to convince him to publish, to use Substack as an outlet to publish on his own. He's already using notes, and we're going to publish. I want to encourage him to be a full member of the Substack community. So, in addition to subscribing to Tell Us News, go and subscribe to Judge Luttig's Substack, which you can find by clicking his name on the piece. And already, without writing anything, he's got thousands of subscribers. One other thing before I let you talk, Judge, is Steve. You built a great audience here. We have over 2,000 people here at the end watching us, listening to us. Go get the link to that piece and send it to 5, 10, 50 of your friends. If everyone on here sent it to their circle, not just on social media, but please share it on social media, but send it to your family and friends, and remind them that it's a great thing to read on this Independence Day. And I promised the judge I would get as many eyeballs on this piece as I possibly could if he took a chance and published it with my modest Substack. And so I want to follow through on that promise and make sure that as many Americans read this piece as possible. So please share it widely.
Thank you both. I'm honored to be on with you today, and it's really a privilege for me to offer this piece of writing to the American people.
I just want to, if I could, do a 100, and I'd like to share a story if I could with all of you. This is a true story about the history of the country, and it's a story that all of you should know, and it's a story that's about Minnesota, where we just saw political assassination, and it takes place in this context again with masked agents and all of the invective. At this hour, 162 years ago, the Confederate Army had invaded Pennsylvania, and their goal was to break the will of the North to fight, to break up the United States. And there was a general in the field named Dan Sickles. And Dan Sickles was a brave man, but he was a dumb man. And he had been a New York congressman who did something 160 some odd years before Trump said he could do it and get away with it. So Trump said he could shoot somebody in broad daylight and get away with it in New York City. Dan Sickles, the New York City congressman, actually did that in Lafayette Square that Trump launched the gas attack on at the Episcopal Church there. And he shot his wife's lover in the head, and Dan Sickles got off with the nation's first insanity defense. And so Sickles, because the Pentagon back in those days was political, was a general at the far end of the Union line, out of position when thousands of Alabamans charged and were coming up to the top of Little Round Top and would have swept the Union troops off of it, except for General Hancock, who becomes the Democratic nominee in 1880 for vice president, who sees what's happening. And he rides at full gallop to the end of the line, and he finds men there. And he says, "What unit is this?" And they say, "We are the 1st Minnesota." Most of them did not speak English. They were immigrants. They fixed bayonets and they charged and they turned back the Confederates, and it remains the highest casualty action in the history of the United States Army. And so on the 250th anniversary of the Army, we celebrated Trump, but not the 1st Minnesota. But the men of the 1st Minnesota who charged the Confederates and turned them back did so when the United States had less than 60 seconds of life left. Because if the Confederates had made it to the top of the hill, there was nothing between them and the White House and the Capitol. And the war would have been over. And they died without a second hesitation in an act of what Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion when he would give a speech there in October to try to talk and tell the nation what had happened there. And so what we're trying to do here is have a discussion about what's happened over 250 years, what's happened that you need to know about, because something has been passed down that we got to hang on to. And that's what Judge Luttig wrote about today. And so in a time when there is distrust, in a time when there is a collapse of faith, this is a man you're looking at on the screen who's all that a federal judge should be. The man of rectitude and probity and judgment, patriot, the best of us. And what he wrote is important. I hope you'll share it. It's been an incredible honor to spend some time with Judge Luttig, of course, with Ryan at Telos. Please subscribe to Judge Luttig. Subscribe to Ryan at Telos. Have a safe and happy 4th of July. We are not celebrating drunks yelling USA, USA. We are celebrating the most sublime and ephemeral ideas in history. And as Thomas Paine said, what we value too cheaply, I forgot. He makes the point that heaven puts a high price on freedom because freedom is worth that price. And thank you both for being with us today. Thank all of you, good Americans, for joining for this conversation.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
You bet.
I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning. I invite you to join this community where I promise to be honest, blunt, and direct about what is happening in this country. America is in crisis. Follow and subscribe to this channel and on Substack. Thank you.